Why am I still? Oh, I'm on the smudge tool for some reason. Let me get a paintbrush. So red, dusty charcoal, watercolor, which that doesn't look very watercolory, does it? What if we do watercolor buildup? And let's get a bigger brush. Now we're getting a little bit of wet edge. Watercolor wash. A little thinner. Kind of a milky, you could see it a little bit in the transition. Airbrush, low density. It's kind of a speckle pattern. There's all these very nice brush textures you can get with all of these legacy brushes. All chalk. Then they have actual physical things. So let me change this from red to green. And you have things like grass. Now, this one's pretty small, but you can plant some grass. Now the grass is definitely a pattern. You can see that the wind's blowing one direction. So it's kind of it's a little bit of a cheat. You have to build up your density, stuff like that. You don't want to ever work on white because then it just shows through as naked area. Maple leaves, oh how romantical. Look how lovely. Alright, this is some of that eye candy crap I was warning you about. You have calligraphic brushes, which are basically just a nice edge, nice ribbon thing. Drop shadow brushes. Don't really understand what that's supposed to be. Guess you're supposed to paint behind something. They're DP brushes. So a lot of the, oh my, yeah. Oh, that's the Blair Witch. Whatever. Okay. So this is adding, you can just, you don't use it and drag it. You would just stamp it a little in places to kind of make a tangle of vines, so to speak. Oh, stars. Yeah, this is another one of those click once, get your effect, move on. Now, these are brushes. These are not object makers. So I can't click. I didn't make any new layers. This is all on one stinking layer. I can't click and grab that one brush spot. Once you paint, you're painting. You're not making objects. Even though some of these brushes do stamp objects, it is literally like a stamp, stamping on paper. Okay? So you have a lot of different options here, and this is mostly for digital painting. Okay? So again, I'm going to wipe this clean by painting over it with white, or I could simply just erase everything. I'll just make a gigantic brush. Everybody goes, but the background color is black, so this was a mistake. Alright, so swap that. Now the background color is white, so this will work much better. There we go. Okay. Now brush presets or brush settings, depending, okay, you click the brush, this all lights up. I mean, you've got snowflakes and you name it. All kinds of gibberish in here. Okay? Most of the time you won't use these special brushes unless you're doing painting. Now, that being said, if, let's say you're trying to clean up a photograph or you had to take a person out of a photograph and then fix the hole that they left behind in the background, well, then some of these special effects brushes could come in handy as replacement textures. Okay? Alright, so that was brushes. Now let's jump down to color real quick. We'll skip text for now. You have a color mixer. The hue cube means the color cube, the brightness, the color wheel. You can switch how you choose color using this menu thing. CMYK sliders. I kind of prefer these, so then you could adjust your color here, and you get the percentage of C, M, Y, and K, or cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. But whatever you like, how you want it to be set up, is totally up to you. Swatches. You'll notice that your swatch palette is different. We have an RGB swatch palette, and you're like, wow, there's not much there, is there? And a CMYK swatch palette, and they look exactly the same, okay? So options, tiny thumbnail, no. We'll do a small thumbnail. Restore default swatches. Well, I've already got it at default. Then they've got legacy swatches, which they've added. So if I open the legacy swatch thing, it's got all these options for Pantone color. And then you've got entire options for, so CMYK, you'll see these, the reds, okay? Most of your color picking is going to be happening here in this color picker, not so much over in the swatches like Illustrator was. You can see when I pick a swatch, it changes over on the color picker, okay? And then gradient, we already kind of touched upon. They have compiled several different gradient mixes, greens, oranges. These are all presets and ones that have been proven to work. That does not mean you must use their presets, okay? They're just there to help get you started. And then adjustments we talked about a little while ago. And then with type, we have kerning, we have leading, we have spacing, we have color. So there's lots of controls here, just like in Illustrator. Same thing with paragraph, left justified, center, right justified, you know, on and on and on. To hyphenate and not to hyphenate. And you're like, well, that's not many palettes. No, it's not. This software is much more about repairing, adjusting, merging, adding, subtracting. It's not so much about designing with Photoshop. Now, that does not mean we are not going to design with Photoshop, but a lot of Photoshop is completely based on the effect you wish to have happen. You're adjusting photography in some way, or the only other use really is to paint from scratch. Now, that being said, let's take a look at our layers palette. It's a workhorse. I'm going to go ahead and pull it out here so we can see it a little bit better. So your layers palette, first and foremost, you have your options menu, which is basically the same menu as the layer menu. But then you have these little things here. You have filter for pixel layers, adjustment layers, filter for type of layer, type layer, not type of layer, type layer, shape layer, so on. What kind of layer is it? You know, are we doing things, are we splitting it apart by what the layer is? And then when you have a layer, you have options of opacity for that layer. You have blending modes, just like in Illustrator, when you overlap things. How do you want to blend them together? Okay. You also have work on that layer, lock that layer, move that layer, and so on. Down here, you have an effects palette, which is the same as the filter palette. Okay. Add a layer mask. That was that editing technique I was telling you about. Adjustment layer. A new group. You can make a folder to put a whole bunch of layers into. Create a new blank layer from nothing and throw a layer away. Pretty self-explanatory. Visible, not visible. Locked, not locked. Okay. So I'm going to shove that back over here. And now the next tab I want to show you is something called paths. Right now we have no path. But if you remember, that was the name of the pen tool line we would make in Illustrator. The same thing applies here, except when we make a path in Photoshop, it goes into its own little palette because it has extra controls assigned to it that Illustrator doesn't have. And then channels has to do with color separations for printing. Okay? If we only look at, if I turn off the CMYK, let's turn off the cyan. So right now we are seeing the black channel, the yellow channel, and the magenta channel. I'm going to turn off the yellow channel. Now we are seeing black and magenta only. So there's a lot of black pixels in there to make that violet. If I turn off black, that is magenta only, but you'll notice it is now switched to grayscale. That is because if we were wanting to burn a plate or a silk screen for the magenta layer, it would only be this part, which is quite a bit. So that shows you that there's a lot of magenta coloring in the entire piece. Let's switch to just yellow only. That's yellow and magenta together. Let's take yellow only, and you'll notice the really dark areas are where there's the most yellow. The really light areas is where there's the least yellow. Cyan, this is yellow and blue. Again, I turn that off. And then if I just do black only, that is all of the black dots on this piece. Okay? And then seeing CMYK as all of them together. If you work at a job that does pre-press or large format printing or color separation, offset printing, it'll be very good for you to know that, because what they do is they print each one of those channels off and onto a film and then use them to shoot the image onto a piece of paper or onto a plate, and that is turned into something you can rub ink on and then press on a piece of paper over and over and over and over. Okay, so that is the entire interface tour. If I've missed something, we will run into it sometime soon.